Thank you for joining us this afternoon on the 16th of Feb. Today is our next little kind of session with regard to criteria surgeries essentially that we'll do at Landbay, just to try and introduce it to the kind of complex nature of buy-to-let that we welcome at Landbay. Today you've got me, Ian Hall. I look after the sales for the North. It says head of sales for the country, but I'm not, just for the North. And then we've also got James Cooper-Smith, who's going to magically appear in the next couple of minutes, who is our portfolio manager. I've known James for a long time. There's not much he doesn't know about buy-to-let, so he's a great kind of asset for our business and obviously for the broker market for you guys, because one of the great things, again, to reiterate with Landbay, is you get direct access to the underwriter, so it makes a real difference with regard to the interaction you have with us. So today, I'm going to cover a little bit about limited company, and I think why I think it's become a little bit more complex. But that's no need to worry. We're here to help, and I think if you cut through it, actually, it's not as complex as it first seems, I should say. And again, the BDMs we've got on the road that support you as brokers, and the underwriters we've got head office are here to support you and make sure you understand and we understand it, and obviously we're not wasting each other's time in regard to kind of creating the ability to lend on a decent buy-to-let deal. So without further ado, let's kick on. Bit of agenda. We're going to look at the standard criteria we've got with a limited company. We're going to look at some of the change in structures, and we're going to look at some examples of layered limited companies. And then we're going to do some kind of underwriting and housekeeping things that I think might be relevant in regard to just making sure the application is successful. So first thing is a little bit about specialist advice. We all know that limited company is potentially a dangerous subject, but not talking about limited company is also potentially a dangerous subject. So that's why we leave this to the accountants and the tax specialists. But one thing we have noticed at Landbay over the years, since 2016, October 16, those clients that used to use the above, so we've got on the left-hand side, what I would deem as the bookkeepers, the old style bookkeeper that might work in a one-man band, that might work in one of these old offices you see on the left-hand side. Basically, it's the bookkeeper the client has always used. They're probably family friends by now. They don't charge much in regard to actually doing the counts and the tax overviews, tax returns for the clients. But I think what we've got to make sure is that the clients are getting the right advice. The importance now of a property accountant or a tax specialist is very, very relevant. Yes, you pay a little bit more money. However, you may get the right advice, because the right advice may not be the cheapest advice. They are more expensive, but the benefit they do is they look at analysis of the client's portfolio in depth, rather than kind of just guessing and always relying on the previous year's income and obviously going off those stats and obviously adding the new figures in. They keep up to date with the tax changes, so therefore always get the best advice to give to the landlords to make sure they are being as tax efficient as they can. So I know Openwork have got a good link, I believe, with a kind of specialist accountant, I think forged some time ago, when obviously these tax changes did make a big splash to the market. So let's talk about our standard limited company criteria. So on the left-hand side is a standard, nice, easy, ABC, SPV, limited company. At Landbay, we would lend to a limited company of that nature. We'd also lend if that was an LLP as well. We'd also lend if it was a trading limited company. So the benefit with Landbay, we don't just look at the specific purpose vehicles, we'll also look at trading limited companies. And that could be anything from mechanics to a doctors, a dentists, a brokers, or an IT consultant. Essentially, that is a little bit more complex, lending to trading companies. And we actually have an individual webinar specific to that in a couple of sessions' time. So we'll cover that in more time at a later date. However, everything we're discussing today is still very relevant when it comes to trading limited companies. But there's some other things that would be a benefit addition to today's session. So we allow up to 4 individuals on a mortgage application, and we would need all directors and any shareholders that have more than 25% and above of shares. So therefore, anyone with 24.9 in shareholding is ignored. So take, for example, the chart on the right-hand side. ABC SPV, there are 2 directors, which is mum and dad. They both own 30% shares each. But because their son and daughter only own 20% in shares and are not directors, they wouldn't have to be subject to the mortgage application. Now, the benefit of this structure is that mum and dad own the majority of the shares as well. So therefore, it's nice and transparent. Mum and dad control, with regard to the fact they've got more shares than the children, they control the kind of direction and the management of the limited company. But son and daughter could be 15 years of age, they could be 2 or 3 years of age, they could be my age, 25, and obviously take from there that, again, because they're 20%, my humour's not very good, apologies, because they're under 20%, 25%, they wouldn't have to be subject to the application. We're going to move on to a little bit of detail about intercompany loans and how they're relevant to limited companies shortly. We also look to take a limited company up to 95 years of age as well. And we're finding that because there is essentially no end date to a limited company. It's all about the directors and the shareholders in a limited company. And that's where their age is relevant rather than the limited company's age. So if, for example, my mother was a director and she was 85, and she wanted me to come on, they'd go on my age. So therefore, they'd take my mother to 95. So they do a 10-year term. Lots of lenders stop at 85, but obviously the benefit to take it to 95. If you've got a younger director or shareholder in the limited company that's going to go on the application, we'd allow you to go to 95 years of age. We'll talk about SIT codes as well. And we're also going to touch off on charges, whether floating charges or debentures. But land-based, we don't need either. But obviously there is some charge relevant, which is your personal guarantees, which we'll discuss later on with James if he joins us. So we also are seeing a lot more of what we call layered limited companies. Now, what I mean by layered limited companies, I've got some nice kind of lines that I'm going to draw in now. The company we're going to be lending to is ABC SPV. Now, mum and dad are both the directors of ABC, ABC SPV. However, the shares are not owned by the company we're lending to. The shares are actually owned by the holding company, which is ABC Holdings. Now, first off, we would need mum and dad on the application form, okay? But then you look a bit further, the shares of ABC Holdings are owned in the same way as the previous slide, where ABC SPV, where the children own 20% shares and the mother and father both own 30% of the shares. This is becoming more and more common because actually ABC might well hold another limited company. And what we're looking for, which is a little bit more apparent on the next slide, is what we class the ultimate beneficial owner. If there is anyone in the holding company or above that has a direct influence or direct control of the limited company by way of voting rights or shares in the limited company, we would probably also want them involved again. So it's important to remember the key principles of looking for the ultimate beneficial owner are all directors and shareholders that have more than 25% or above share in the company we are lending to. So take, for example, this example, ABC SPV. We're going to break it down once more. So here's a scenario. Mr. And Mrs. Smith, it was Mr. and Mrs. Smith, but Mr. Smith, his brother, Mrs. Smith, has got married and become Mrs. Jones. But because they started out some property originally when they were brother and sister and they weren't married, they now want to start including their children. So they've set up a limited company called ABC SPV again, but it's owned by 50% Smith Holding and 50% Jones Holding. Sorry, which are on the side there. So therefore, we need to welcome James. We now need to look at who owns Smith Holding and Jones Holding. Therefore, in this example, Jones Holding and Smith Holding are then owned by Mr. Smith's family and Mrs. Jones's family. And what I'm going to point you to now is that the only difference here is that Mr. Smith got married, so Mrs. Smith is now a shareholder as well. She owns 30%. And Mrs. Jones got married, and Mr. Jones is a shareholder. But because they have not become directors, the only two people that would be required on an application with Land Bay to ABC SPV would still be Mr. Smith and Mrs. Jones. Essentially, that's because Mr. Smith and Mrs. Jones are still directors, and Mrs. Smith and Mr. Smith only have a smaller shareholding. The thing to bear in mind here is that we also do want to see that at least 50% of the shares are owned by the people that are on a mortgage application, and that's for control. So this might need a little bit of tinkering, because if you break it down, essentially, 30% to 50% for Mr. Smith is just under 25%. So the combination might be just under 50. But this is for example purposes. It's nice and easy to show up this way. Limited company deposits. Again, this is a hot topic in the market. People get concerned with this. There are certain lenders we know in the market that don't allow limited company deposits from certain kind of sources. We are pretty flexible, and again, that's why it's important to rely on your BDM or your underwriter to make sure that you're aware of how this limited company deposit will be shaping the application form. The first bit of good news is that on our website, we actually have a limited company deposit form, which basically cuts through all this in relation to what we do accept and what we don't accept. Essentially, a limited company deposit is recorded in a limited company, as you can see at the bottom, either by means of an intercompany loan or director's loan. Again, this is deemed relevant from the accountant. Obviously, the broker shouldn't really be recommending the structure of how the deposit is actually recorded in the limited company. That would be down to the accountant. But the example on the left-hand side shows that the trading company, obviously, profits can be moved from a trading company where the directors are common in the SPV. They can be moved in as an intercompany loan. Alternatively, the trading company could pay income out to the individuals, and those individuals from their normal personal accounts could then deposit money into the SPV. The various ways, if you follow the chart down, on the right-hand side, it would be deemed normally as an intercompany loan, and there's a term required, an interest rate payment required, and a repayment date required. Again, advice from the accountant, but that's why we've got the form online to make sure it's easy to record. And on the left-hand side, this is simply money coming from a standard bank into an SPV limited company. And again, the accountant would be the best person to advise us how that is then recorded in that limited company.
Cool. Do you want to also just add, it's quite common where a development company will build a block of flats and then sell the flats to the SPV, where the deposit will essentially be the equity, which we would then cover off under the intercompany loan. So we just need the form. We wouldn't need any evidence of funds because it's the equity, and the form covers that off nicely. Same as if going from personal names into the company as an incorporation, again, a director's loan agreement would cover off the equity. So it's nice, clean and simple. We don't need any additional bits and bobs.
Spot on. That's a good USP as well. Thank you, James. Again, that just shows the benefit of the fact the underwriters know what they're talking about in respect to how we make the deal work. Discussion up front is always relevant as well. The housekeeping, just timely for James to kick on some housekeeping. First one.
Yes, so for SPVs, we just need the relevant SIC codes like the S8100, S68329, and the other ones. We have got a list of them on the website. All limited companies, we need personal guarantees for anyone on the application. If it's a layered one that like Ian has gone through before, where we need the ultimate owners on the application, they all do have to sign PGs. They also all have to have independent legal advice, but if they're an existing applicant, then we can look to waive ILA. But if they're a first-time applicant, we will need them to have ILA. And solicitors, we have got quite a wide panel of solicitors. We can do separate and joint rep, but for separate, we do have a more condensed panel of 5 who are more, we'd like to think, are more experienced in handling slightly complicated cases.
I think that's what we've seen as well, James. We've seen that sometimes, again, back to the accountants and making sure the clients are using an accountant that obviously keeps up to date with all the relevant tax implications. I think that's very relevant for solicitors as well, because a solicitor may well say they're kind of used to limited company transactions. Actually, a lot aren't, and a lot make it more complicated. And even though they might be cheaper on the outset, they then become more costly when the final fees become due. And obviously, for us, a nice easy transfer, a nice easy conveyance is a lot easier, and I'm sure the brokers would agree in the room today as well.
Yeah.
So, because James is the portfolio manager, I thought I'd allow him to go through a few of these bits.
So yeah, for portfolios, the background portfolio is not of a concern LTV wise. We don't look too much into that. We don't do any debt to income ratio. We do have a specialist portfolio team, which is headed up by myself. We do have a fair amount of experience in that area now. We just need the background portfolio to pass the basic stress of 125 at 5. And we can look into that in a bit more detail if it's there or thereabouts. Clients can raise finance against their portfolio for future purchases. We can capital raise for any means apart from tax bills and gambling debts. So yeah, I mean, we have done a few
business purposes as well. So a lot of lenders in our space obviously restrict you being able to raise capital for business purposes. And obviously a lot of lenders deem limited company buy-to-let as business purposes. Obviously we don't. And obviously the benefit, we also allow trading companies as well. So therefore we allow business capital raise for trading businesses as well.
Yeah, and we've done a few where we're capital raising against the portfolio for a new buy-to-let purchase, which we're also doing as well. So, and if it's a large portfolio, then we can look to do something on fees, app fees or valuation fees, depending on the circumstances. But as it says, you need to speak to your BDM about that.
I mean, that really quick fire. Hopefully we've covered a lot of content there. I think hopefully what you do see is that when it comes to limited company, it's about making sure you're aware of the structure. If you're concerned about the structure, refer it to the BDM, refer it to the help desk that we have, who have access to the underwriters. We're here to help. There's not many limited companies we can't lend to, but obviously the kind of shape that accountants are trying to come out with regard to limited companies can sometimes be a little obscure and perhaps avoid too many tax rules that we as lenders can't avoid ourselves. But again, lenders aren't tax advisors and neither are brokers. We do have to rely on accountants to provide the right advice for that client. But obviously what they need to bear in mind is they also need to fit the lender's requirements. So it's a kind of balancing act between understanding what the accountants want and obviously what the lenders want as well. So that's is it for the day. Thanks for listening. I think we have some questions. I'm just trying to move on to the next stream. I think we had some questions. Don't confuse accountants with tax advisors. Correct. There's a good mix. Again, some accountants do believe they are tax specialists, but some accountants have specialist departments in their accountancy office that offer specialist tax advice. I think the important thing is, and Max is quite right, we've got to make sure that the landlord is using the right kind of qualified person to give the right advice, whether it be an accountant that specialises or a tax specialist as well. I think we had some pre-qualified questions as well, didn't we, James?
Yeah, there was one on flats above commercial. We'll look at flats above commercial. We'll go up to 75% on those. The only things we don't like flats above are fast food, takeaways, and restaurants. Above or adjacent to any of those, we wouldn't entertain unless it's, say, a newish build high-rise block and we're 5-6 floors clear of anything like that, then we'd be fine. But anything above commercial apart from those, feel free to refer them over. We'll happily have a look and give guidance where we can or can't do something.
Did we have another one as well? If you've got any questions, do pop them in the chat box. We are still here for another couple of minutes.
I can't see any.
Is everyone in the room done a limited company? Any complications that came out of those, let us know. Again, probably about 75% of our business is limited company. So we do see a great deal of different shapes and structures of limited companies. A lot of the business that we do on limited companies is also in the 5-year kind of realm. So therefore, the benefit we do have on a 5-year fixed rate is that the limited company pay rate is 125%, and 125% at the pay rate, our lowest 5-year fixed pay rate is 2.84. 125 at 2.84 means that there's not many deals that don't fit. So therefore, top slicing is probably not relevant, because 125 at 2.84, if it doesn't fit that, it probably isn't a very good buy to let.
There's another question coming, saying limited company with 3 directors and 2 shareholders with equal shares, 20% each. Can the applicant proceed with only directors? So yeah, we always need all directors on the application regardless. So as long as those directors have this significant shareholding, then we'll be good with that.
In that circumstance, if I read it right, 60% of the shares are owned by directors, so we'd be comfortable with that.
That's how I'm doing it.
Yeah, the only circumstance we can look at this, but it's more on an individual case-by-case basis. We'd normally like to see that at least 50% of the shares are owned by the people on our mortgage application. So therefore, they've got the control and the direction of the limited company to hand. PGs, as James mentioned before, personal guarantees, the ILA that sits behind the personal guarantees can be quite expensive. So the benefit that we offer with regard to ILA waiver is huge for existing customers. But it's also good for us because ILA, in the first place, the existing solicitor can do it. It can't be the solicitor dealing with the transaction, but it can be another solicitor within the same firm of solicitors, which is a good thing to have, because unfortunately, ILA costs can be, I've heard of anything from £20 for an ILA up to £800 for an ILA. So the difference in cost can be quite significant. That's why the benefit of ILA waiver makes a huge saving for the clients.
Did you cover off that we'd look at shareholders buying out other shareholders with?
No, I didn't. That's a good case study, Mr. Cooper-Smith. If you could
so in some circumstances, say you've got 2 business partners, they want to separate out the business. Director A has 50% shares, Director B has 50% shares, quite simple. Director A wants to buy out Director B. We can do that as a remortgage with Director A owning all of the shares on completion. We've done a couple. We just had a specific offer condition that solicitors confirm that it will happen on completion. Obviously, it wouldn't happen before completion because Director B is not want to give up his shares in the company for nothing. So yeah, we will entertain that. We have got one ongoing at the moment, which is slightly more complicated, where there's more shareholders involved. But as long as we can get to the bottom of what the transaction is and how it's working and it makes sense, then we can consider it and look at it.
Thank you, James.
No worries.
The only other thing to mention just before we finish is that one big topic at the moment on everyone's agenda is EPCs. The requirement in 2025, Jan 2025, for all rented properties to meet an A to C rating. We've actually introduced some cracking products that give the client a benefit if their property rating is A to C. That includes new builds, which is good to see. And obviously it includes limited company applications as well, because we don't charge any different rate in regard to individual applications or limited companies, with the exception of trading limited companies. There is a small levy for trading limited companies because they are a little bit more risky. So yeah, thank you for listening. Hopefully you found it useful. Any further questions, please drop them through. I am sorry Sophie couldn't join us today. She had internet problems. David was going to join us as well, but he was on another call. So hope you found today's session useful. If you did want CPD certificate, I believe Ben is available in regard to sending those through. Or if you want any more criteria specifics, please don't hesitate to call myself or your BDM. My email address is ian.hall@landbay.co.uk. We had one more question as well. Thanks, guys. Yeah, thank you, James. Thanks for joining us. Thank you all.
Cool. Thank you.